Who Gets to Decide? A liberty-based podcast that brings a little piece of sanity to a confused society drowning in a culture of craziness. And here is your host, Seth Martin.
Well, all right. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This is Seth Martin, your host, and this is episode 654. Thank you for joining me this evening. Glad you're here, and always happy you're listening. Well, the hot topic, and I think we're going to see this from the Democrats as we get closer and closer to election season, is the entire discussion around affordability. And, you know, what does this mean? And one of the things I want to talk to you about what it doesn't mean is the way we made the Affordable Health Care Act affordable, which is we decided that a bunch of people didn't have enough money to pay for health insurance, and we decided to subsidize a whole bunch of people's health insurance. And then when that all came out, people were shocked at how much some people were getting in subsidies. So that's not making things affordable. You know, borrowing money from the government and offloading expenses that should be incurred by citizens, you know, getting services, is not making something that affordable. That's just kicking the can down the road to some future generation. And so today we're going to talk about affordability, but we're not going to talk about it in that way. We're going to talk about it in the real kind of free market way, and the things that really put downward pressure on pricing to improve the lives of consumers. And so I think most people understand that distinction. Like if you have a lavish lifestyle and your parents are rich and they're funding it, well, that's not you having an affordable lifestyle. That's somebody else subsidizing you. And so this is, I think, obvious to people, but you know, for whatever reason, we think if the government pays it, you know, if the government subsidizes it, well, that's making it more affordable. No, this is kind of like the question. We're going to talk about housing here in a minute, but this is like, you know, lowering interest rates to make housing more affordable. Well, that lowers the payment, but the price of the house doesn't go down. If anything, it goes up. It's like college tuition. It's gone nothing but upward as interest rates have come down, as they've made it more affordable to borrow money. Okay, I use that word affordable in there. Probably shouldn't have. As they've made the monthly payments lower by lowering interest rates, the prices of things have actually gone up. And so that's not affordability. Affordability is like when, you know, you could buy something for $500 one day, and then, you know, a week later it's on sale for $250. That means it's more affordable. Okay, somebody's actually lowered the price on that to move that inventory. And the free market does things like this all the time. But when you obscure real services behind government programs, effectively what happens is, in the case of the Affordable Care Act, you've got, you know, Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare. These types of companies are getting, you know, their stocks have done nothing but go up and to the right. And the reason is because they're just getting more taxpayer money as opposed to customer money. And this is not affordability, okay? This is just privilege, connectedness, living off the government. This is a form of socialism or fascism or whatever you want to call it, whatever ism you want to call it. It's not capitalism. And this is often the problem when, you know, you hear some of these critiques of capitalism, and a lot of times what it gets down to is they're talking about crony capitalism. They're talking about privileged individuals that know somebody in government that have gotten them a seat at the table to set the game up in their favor. And that's not where most of us live. We live in a world where we go to the store and, you know, there's a price on something and we make a decision, and the store makes a decision to, you know, maybe lower the price or raise the price. This is where most of us live. So I want to talk about affordability kind of in that context. And before we get started, I've got a couple of news clips. This first one is about cars. Cars are not getting more affordable, they're getting less affordable. And this is due to a bunch of reasons. They're going to talk about some of the reasons in here, but I'm going to talk about more because I've done some other research on cars to, kind of learn about some of the other things they're doing to cars and what types of regulations and things like that cars are subjected to. The title of today's show, I mean, I haven't developed the title yet, but it's going to be something pretty provocative like Trump cannot make your life more affordable or something like that. Affordability does not come from Trumpism, something like that. Because there's a lot of people talking about how Trump is working hard to make things more affordable. But at the same time, he's browbeating the Fed to lower interest rates. And so these things do not go together, right? The only way the Fed can lower interest rates is if it sells more bonds. And in some cases, they're the buyer of those bonds, and that's not going to make things more affordable. I just think it's important to have this discussion. I think it's going to become more important as we come closer and closer to November. And I think people need to not be deceived. Okay, that's what I would say about that. There's a lot of deception, a lot of lying, a lot of I promise I'm going to lower the price of this and I'm going to lower the price of that. The only people that can lower prices are people that are producers of things. And the government doesn't produce anything except debt. As far as I can tell, in wars, they're very good at producing wars and debt, as far as I can tell. So with that, let's go ahead and play this first clip. It's from ABC News, and it's just about cars and affordability, which is a big item. Behind a house, a car is like someone's next most expensive thing. So it's pretty important when you're looking at the economy on where the price of cars are, where they're going, what people are paying for cars. As people borrow money for cars and they can't afford them, let's say they lose their job or something, those cars are going to get repossessed, and then that creates bank stress. And so it's better. A friend of mine's dad used to always say cash is always cheaper, and there's a lot of truth to that. First of all, you're not having to pay interest rates, but then if the banks weren't loaning as much money out into the marketplace, there wouldn't be new money being created to the degree it is, which is undermining our life, our lifestyle, our standard of living. So let's play this first clip and listen to the report, and we'll come back on the other side and comment on it.
It is not just gas prices, but also the cost of buying a car that's significantly higher than it was a few years ago. The average price of a new car is about $50,000. That is 30% higher than in 2019. As consumers feel the pinch both at the pump and at the dealership, Ford is trying to tackle the affordability issue by discounting most of its new vehicles. CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve spoke with the CEO, Jim Farley.
Calling the move American value for American values, Ford plans to discount most new cars as it marks America's 250th anniversary, offering employee pricing, CEO Jim Farley.
We want to celebrate veterans and those people that really make our communities run.
The months-long sale move comes as the average American is paying roughly $800 a month for their car. 1 in 5 have a payment at or above $1,000.
Can Americans afford the price of these cars today?
Some Americans can, but we need to do a great job as a brand and as an industry to make our vehicles more affordable. And I think you're certainly going to see that at Ford over the next couple of years.
When you say that, some Americans can afford the high price of cars, is that alone a problem, that only some Americans can afford the cars now?
Of course. That's why we're coming out with more affordable vehicles, and that's why we're offering employee pricing.
Ford is coming off a strong first quarter, but like most Americans, is seeing costs rise as the conflict in Iran rages on.
If the prices stay high, then that will flow into our business. We've had $1 billion so far this year, and thankfully we're able to offset a lot of that at the company. But no doubt the rising costs, are a headwind for us.
Friday, President Trump announced a plan to add a 25% tariff on European vehicles, claiming the EU is not fully complying with its trade deal.
I don't want to get into specific tariff policy. I think the real focus for all of us should be on how we treat the Chinese auto industry.
The average price for a gallon of gas sits at about $4.40 a gallon, up more than 30 cents in the last week, up about $1.21 from a year ago.
What have you seen change as gas prices have soared?
It's pretty interesting. It's actually kind of a divergent. We're seeing more demand for V8s, and at the same time, we've seen the EV market pop up to about 7% of the U.S. industry in April, which is very strong.
As Ford looks to make a deal at the start of the summer. For CBS Saturday Morning, I'm Chris Van Cleve in Phoenix.
Okay. You know, the word affordable is in there a bunch of times, you know, and he talks about some Americans can afford these cars. And so I just want to bring up a couple of things about cars. For one thing, they've done some things to these cars where, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but like even the F-150s, when you go buy an F-150, it's no longer the 8-cylinder 5.0 V8, you know, engine. It's a, I don't even know what it is. It's some smaller engine with a turbocharger on it. And what they've done with these engines, I don't know if you change your own oil, you've noticed this. You'll see things like 5W20 motor oil. And I'm getting in the weeds a little bit, but the reason you're seeing these things is because they're having to make these cars, the CAFE standards, which is the standard that they use for mileage and things like that, it's always being reduced. And so these car manufacturers have to make their fleets in such a way that they can meet these CAFE standards. And so what they're doing is they're putting smaller and smaller engines in the cars. There's more and more aluminum parts. The tolerances on the engines are tighter. They have to put turbochargers on them. The oil's thinner, so it has, in order to get through all these tighter grooves and stuff in the engine. There's a lot to all this, and what's happening is the cars are more expensive because all this is, you know, when you have tighter tolerances on your machining, when you're making engines, that makes the engine more expensive. All to get like a half a mile per gallon or 1 mile per gallon. That's it. That's all they're getting for all these major changes, and this is bad for consumers. Not only that, but they're putting all these sensors on them. Some of the sensors are great. They make your life better, like lane changing sensors and things like that. But there's other sensors now that are coming where they're looking at your eyes and making sure you're not looking down at your phone. And the car, you know, starts to, I was reading an article the other day where the young girl was like, it almost made me crash. You know, there was like people that almost ran into me because the car was slowing down so rapidly. Because I wasn't looking, she was like, I wasn't looking at my phone, but the sensor couldn't see my eyes. And, you know, I had to pull over and, you know, it was dangerous. And so there's all these kinds of things going on with cars. And, you know, look, I love the radio, the podcasting capability and stuff in the car, the navigation stuff. I like the leather seats. You know, I like some of these things, but some of these things are just way overkill. They have sensors where there's not even really, it's not necessary to have a sensor. Like, you know, do you really need to have a sensor that tells you that your fuel tank thing is open? I mean, I don't know. There's all kinds of sensors. There's sensors in the windshield now that detect fog on the windshield and automatically turn on your defrost. I mean, is it really necessary for all these things? And of course, now we're coming into a situation where the chip market is being impacted by this global conflict. And that's going to make it, you know, that's going to really change the supply chain for these vehicles. So there's a lot of challenges with these vehicles, and most of it is dictated by governments. And meanwhile, you know, you're trying to figure out how you're going to buy a car. I personally have gotten to where I just buy older cars, but eventually the older cars are going to be the new cars, you know what I mean? So, I mean, this is not going to keep me out of that game forever. But like I'll just tell you a quick story. I had a 2020 Ford Explorer, and it was a great looking vehicle. I mean, it looked good. It had good space in it, and it was laid out real nicely on the inside and everything. But every time I stopped at a stop sign or a light, you know, the engine would shut off. So I hated that. It also had, my old Ford Explorer had a 6-cylinder engine in it. This one had a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. So in order to make it drive with the same kind of power envelope or whatever, they had to put a turbocharger on it and a 10-speed transmission. So it was just very jerky. You'd pull to a stop sign and it's an automatic vehicle, but it felt like a downshifting kind of thing. And then of course it switched a lot of gears when you took off, and it just wasn't a very nice driving vehicle. It had 10-speed transmission. So I got rid of that and I went and looked for like a 6 or 7-speed transmission vehicle with a V6 in it, and that's kind of what I'm doing now. I don't know if this bothers other people. Maybe it only bothers people that grew up with cars that had 8-cylinder engines and that drove nice and smooth and didn't have to rev way up, and you can hear these turbochargers. It's kind of making a clicking sound under your hood. You're like, what is that? I don't like that. So there's just a lot of things about these cars. Consumers aren't really clamoring for these things. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the government's putting certain regulations on the companies that produce these cars, and the car companies have to respond with new designs. And the only way you can make, it's just physics, right? The car has a certain amount of mass. It takes a certain amount of power to move a car, so many feet and so many feet per second. And so they just have to redesign them in such a way that they meet these CAFE standards, but it really changes the experience in driving these vehicles. And it makes them unaffordable. I mean, there's no reason for a car to cost $50,000. I mean, that's insane. That's like a third of the price I paid for my house 25 years ago or whatever. So it's just, these are stupid things, and we need to kind of understand the origin of these problems that are being created. It's like Leonard Reed said, the government breaks your leg and then offers you a crutch, right? Ford is doing their part. I mean, they're not giving employee pricing to everybody because they love you. They're doing it because their car sales are they see a decline potentially in their car sales, and they're trying to move more vehicles, keep their factories running. All right, the next clip is going to be about the next bigger thing, which is housing. Housing, in most cases, is people's largest expense, and so it's something you got to look at, right? When you're looking at how people are doing, you got to look at housing as part of that. All right, here we go.
I think it's not a realistic benchmark. I think that the problem in the housing market's a structural problem that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. So I think that, while it might appear that things were more affordable in 2019, this kind of march toward lack of affordability has been going on for a long time, and it's going to take a long time to make a dent in it. I think the in the Realtor.com article, just how radical those moves would be with respect to interest rates or home price depreciation or income increases. It just shows you how much work we have to do, and I have to compliment the Trump administration now for really putting this into bright focus, because I think it's going to be really, really necessary, and moving all of those levers as much as we can is going to be super, super important. You can't really point to one factor, whether it's interest rates or income or home prices, as to the determining factor around the affordability crisis that we have in this country. And I think increasing supply is probably one of the most important things we can do, and that the administration can foster to help in this crisis. I think the bond buyback program and the restriction on massive multinational private equity firms soaking up huge amounts of housing supply should be something that that politicians on both sides of the aisle should be able to support. I think those are the kind of big structural moves that actually, combined with other things, can actually move the needle. And actually, it just can be encouraging to people psychologically that they have an administration that understands what is fair and what is not fair.
Okay, fair and not fair doesn't really factor in. I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't fair. But, you know, this guy's from the realtor industry. And the thing about it is what they're looking at, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, the government, what it does when it sees like home prices that are high and they're unaffordable and people can't, you know, young people can't start families or whatever because they can't get a house, you know, they're looking at the monthly payment. And this is kind of an end around on affordability. Affordability is, what is the price of the house cost? You know, affordability is like, when you look at affordability, you have to look at it like I'm paying cash. Okay, so if something is affordable, it's affordable because you're paying all of it right now. Okay, or what if I was paying all of it right now? Would it be affordable? And I don't know, the average home price now is like $440,000. Again, this is like 3 times what I paid for my house. Maybe not quite, maybe a little less than 3, and I still live in my house, but you know, that doesn't even, you know, there's maintenance with the house too. Your air conditioner breaks, you have to put a new roof on, there's expense associated with the house. I just don't see how you can buy a $440,000 house, even if you're in the upper areas of income, like if you're a 3 or 4 or even a $500,000 a year family is going to struggle to own a home, pay for the maintenance, pay for the upkeep, and the taxes and insurance and all that stuff. Even if you make $300,000 to $500,000, you're still going to have trouble. So I don't know how somebody just coming out of college who's making, somewhere between 75 and 100 or 110 or something, I don't see how they're going to be able to afford a home. It doesn't matter what you do with the interest rate. It doesn't matter how many more houses you build. We're going to play a Saifedean Ammous here in a second. But, you know, there's a Saifedean Ammous, one of the things he says is like, people, because of our money, because of the destruction of our money, people are looking to store value. And you have to understand when, back 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago, when people wanted to store value, when they wanted to save, they just took some of their gold coins and put them in the drawer. And that's how they saved. And what would happen is those gold coins, because the economy was producing more all the time, prices would come down. That's what normally happens. Like if as your population grows and your economy is producing more and more, I mean, how else do you explain that 90% of the population left, the fields of farming to go into something else? Well, the only reason that happened is because the Industrial Revolution came along and farming became more and more productive, and people left the farms for other types of jobs, and a fewer and fewer number of people could feed the masses with fewer and fewer numbers of people working in farming. Okay, well, that just means we were more productive. Okay, so fewer people could work on farms and feed everybody, and then some of those people went and they worked in factories, or they started businesses, or they looked around to see kind of what the market needed, and they did something. Okay, that's how you ended up with, I don't know, us being largely an agrarian society to people moving to cities and doing things, okay, doing other things. And so as an economy grows and becomes more complex, what happens is the prices of everything go down over time. But what's constantly working against that in our economy is the value of the money is constantly decreasing, which causes things to go up. So while prices should be coming down, they're staying flat or going up because the government's producing more and more money. Just think of it like this, like 125 years ago, the economy was growing at 15% and money was growing at 2%. Well, today it's just the opposite. Now the economy is growing 2%, but the production of money is growing 15%. And so what happens is your prices go up faster than your economy can produce more and more stuff to make prices go down. It's just that simple. And so affordability has to do with the new money that's created all the time. It's created in the banking system. It's created by the Fed. It's created by the Treasury when it borrows money. Anytime any money is borrowed, anytime any credit is created, that expands the money. That expands the money and credit in the economy. And so this is really what drives the lack of affordability. This is why I say Trump is not going to make things more affordable. The government's not going to make things more affordable. Not unless they're just going to, like I said, burn $6 trillion on the Fed's balance sheet and a whole bunch of bad debt gets liquidated. That's the only way you can make prices come down. And of course, that's I'm not advocating for that. That's very traumatic to a financial system, that people lose their jobs, and that's awful. But that's what happens when all this bad credit expands. Some of those people are not going to be able to pay back these loans. And so you have defaults. And when you have defaults, money disappears from the economy. But short of that, there's no way to make prices come down other than entrepreneurs just lowering their price to be more competitive. So this is, a guy named Bob Prechter, Robert Prechter. He didn't develop L8 wave analysis, but he kind of brought it back. And you should look up Bob Prechter. He's an interesting guy. His name's Robert Prechter, and he runs a business called EWI. But one of the things there's this whole, I'm getting off tangent here a little bit, but if you go get your MBA in college, okay, what you'll learn is something called efficient market hypothesis, EMH. And efficient market hypothesis basically says that everything in the market is known at any given time. And therefore, the market efficiency is always there. So if you want to go buy IBM stock, then everything that is known about IBM and IBM stock is reflected in that price when you pull up IBM's ticker symbol. But Robert Prechter, he says, and I think he's right, and I think EMH is wrong, efficient market hypothesis is wrong. Robert Prechter says, no, that's not what's happening. And he has a whole, his is the socioeconomic theory of finance, STF. And one of the things that drives his theory, and they're both theories, okay, because, we only have one economy. It's very difficult to just prove things. You just have to kind of logically think through things to let's say argue for one theory over the other. But one of the things that drives STF is if you look at everything that's for sale, okay, in the marketplace, it falls on some sort of spectrum. And like one end of the spectrum would be like bread, okay? When you look at something like bread, true supply and demand acts on bread, right? There's people that make and sell bread, and there's people that buy and eat bread, okay? So that's purely supply and demand. And then he says as you move across the spectrum toward purely financial assets or financial instruments, there's a range of things. For example, oil. Oil is a commodity. So oil is traded like a stock. They trade futures on oil, but it's also being used. So there's a supply and demand element of oil, but there's also this financialization of oil. And he said, as you move across the spectrum, some of the pricing in some of these things is financialization. And he says housing is one of those. So housing, yes, there are people that just live in houses, and Saifedean Ammous is going to talk about this a little bit, jumping the gun. But the most important thing about a house is it for to be there for people to live in it. But there's also this financial element of housing, right? People are buying and selling houses. People own a bunch of houses and rent them out to people. And you see this with BlackRock and companies like that. They've bought up all these houses, and now they're turning around and renting them back to people. And so there's this financialization element. And so I think, Robert Prechter is right in the way he thinks about the financial markets, about some of these financial / supply and demand instruments like housing or oil. I think he's absolutely right about that. In fact, let's just jump to the Saifedean Ammous. I think you'll get what he's talking about, where he's just talking about how people use their houses as savings accounts. And this is, that's not the purpose of a house. The purpose of a house is to live in it and raise a family. But the run-up in houses is in part due to the financialization of housing. It's also in part due to the destruction of the money, our money system. So these two elements have nothing to do with whether or not people want to buy a house to live in, and yet they have huge factors on why prices are where they are for houses. All right, let's pull up that clip, and then we'll come back and listen to or talk about what Saifedean is saying here.
Instead of just holding on to money, people are out there speculating with all of those assets. So therefore, these assets are constantly getting inflated, becoming more and more expensive, which has enormous tragic ramifications. I think the most obvious one is that people use their homes as saving accounts. And so everybody is, encouraged to get into debt for a house. And this is really very wise in the fiat economy. You're much better off getting into debt to buy a house than you are to save money in order to buy the house eventually. Because if you're saving money, the house is becoming a lot more expensive every year. You think the house is getting expensive. The house is not getting expensive. The house is probably staying the same. It's just your money that's losing value. To be fair, no, the house is getting a little bit more expensive because your money is losing value. So everybody else is getting rid of their money as much as they can and buying as much houses as they can because the houses devalue less than the money devalues. So you're out there waiting, you're a young 25-year-old and you want to get married and you and your fiance are thinking about saving up money for buying a house. And you're looking at the house you want to buy and every month it gets more expensive. And the reason is that you're not just up against other 25-year-olds who want to buy this house. You're up against 35 and 45 and 65 and 75-year-olds who are looking for saving accounts. They're buying that house to rent it out because that's better than putting money in the bank account.
You're also up against BlackRock. That's what I was talking about. BlackRock, companies like BlackRock and Vanguard and these companies, they're buying up houses too because they think, this is probably going to lead to a bad outcome, but they think houses never go down, just like they thought in 2008 houses never go down. But part of the reason the houses are going up is the destruction of the money, which he's talking about, but also because you've got these huge pools of investors that are buying up these houses to turn around and rent them back to Gen Zers. All right, let's continue.
And so therefore, people are just always speculating on all these assets. The stocks are shooting up. Bonds are shooting up, usually not the last 5-6 years or so. But bonds are going up. All these bubbles are just always popping up everywhere in the market where all of these things go up in value because people realize that the dollar, the money, is a hot potato that you need to get rid of. And so because of that, houses continuously get a lot more expensive because people are using them as saving accounts. You're competing with people who are looking for a saving account, not just people who are looking for a home. And so, of course, older people have more money, so they end up buying more and more houses, and that outbids young people. And so young people have to keep renting. And that's why you've got an entire generation now that is getting used to just the idea that they're going to be renting for a very long time. They may never be able to buy homes because they can't compete with the 60 and 70-year-olds who are buying those homes to rent them out because that's better use of money than putting it in a bank account. Fortunately, Bitcoin fixes this because now the 50 and 60 and 70-year-olds are going to realize that house is nowhere near as good an investment as just buying Bitcoin. You look at the performance of real estate over the last 5-6 years, you compare it to the performance of Bitcoin, not just the 5-6 years, since Bitcoin has existed, and you see Bitcoin does a lot better.
Okay, I don't want to get off topic and start talking about Bitcoin, although I don't disagree with him. It's just not, Bitcoin is, if you have some Bitcoin and it's going up, obviously you can use that money to make your life more affordable, but it's not really the thing we're talking about here. So, but Saifedean, he's talking about 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds competing with 25-year-olds for housing. But again, it's not just that. It's these large pools of investors who also are trying to hedge against the dollar. See, this is what's happening. Okay, everybody knows when a lot of these companies would go like BlackRock or whatever. They would hold certain numbers of treasuries. But if you remember, a year ago, the treasury market just torpedoed. Bonds went way, way down. And in fact, Silicon Valley Bank and a couple other banks they did go insolvent until the Fed came in and rescued them. But these large institutions typically hold quite a few treasuries because they need a large liquid market where they can put their money. What they've been doing over the last several years is buying, opening real estate brokers and paying real estate agents to go snap up property. This is why you get solicitations all the time. Hey, I'm a local investor. I'm looking at buying, or would you be open to selling your house? They're buying it for BlackRock or Vanguard or one of these places where there's large pools of capital that they're trying to, avoid the risk of de-dollarization. I get into this kind of discussion with a friend of mine all the time about if the economy collapses, that'll be the end of America. And I'm like, no, hold on a second. That's not entirely true, because the thing about it is we'll still have all the stuff. Think about it. If the stock market went to zero, I'd still have my house, still have my car. We still have all the roads and the bridges and the buildings and the infrastructure and just everything. So no, that's not the end of America. It's just the liquidation of a whole bunch of bad debt. That's all it is. So, and some of this bad debt may be BlackRock and Vanguard buying up houses. And if the house prices go back 10 or 20% or 30% or whatever, and they have to write down those investments, BlackRock's business is going to suffer, right? All right, I'm going to switch gears again. And this time I'm going to put my glasses on, and I'm going to read from this Zero Hedge article a little bit, because I think it really brings up a number of things that are important when you're looking at affordability. So let me put on my glasses and look at this. It's the headline of this article is 18 Shocking Facts that prove the U.S. economy is in far worse shape than most people realize. So I'm just going to go through some of these. I don't know if we're going to go through all of them, but consumer confidence in the United States has fallen to an all-time record low. All-time record low. That's really something. So I don't know if you know anything about the consumer confidence ratings, but anytime it's below 50, they're saying, the market is in kind of a contraction or something. And it's down 10.7% to 47.6. That's an all-time record low. Number two, student loan delinquencies have exploded to a level that we've never seen before. Student loan delinquency has climbed to roughly 25% of borrowers. And basically, that debt you are not able to discharge. You can't file bankruptcy and discharge that debt. So, I've seen horrible videos online where somebody had like $50,000 in student debt and they paid on it for 20 years and it's still $50,000. You got to aggressively pay that stuff down in order for it to go down. Okay, the monthly cost of owning a home has risen to absurd heights. Well, that's what we just talked about. So all in, the monthly median housing payment for an owner, including mortgage, principal, interest, taxes, in homeowners insurance, and an estimated maintenance expense has ballooned to more than $2,800 per month, a staggering 72% increase from 6 years ago when it was $1,635. So again, this, when we shut down the economy over COVID and the government printed up $5.5 trillion or whatever it was, all this came flooding out of the banks and into various places, and caused assets to go up. It caused insurance prices to go up. It caused everything to go up because there was more money sloshing around in the economy, and we weren't really increasing our production. So all this money this new money had to be absorbed by the economy, and that made prices go up. Foreclosure filings are way up in 2025, 26% above last year. So this is people, that can't afford their home, and the banks are foreclosing on them. This is from new Atom data, whatever that is, Atom, ATT, or maybe all Atlom, ATLOM data shows 118,727 properties were hit with foreclosure filings just in the first quarter. Okay, that's just in the first quarter. The number of Americans that cannot pay their credit card bill in full each month is also at a record high. More than 11 million people are not able to pay off their monthly credit card bill. That's incredible. I mean, that's a huge number. In the total credit card debt is over $1 trillion. Cost of living soars. Yep, we know that. Let's see. Last year, so people are basically going into their 401ks and taking early withdrawals. Last year, a record 6% of all workers in 401k plans administered by Vanguard, that's just Vanguard, took a hardship withdrawal. So, they're not able to get it done with the money they have. It's their income. I know some people that have done that. So this is very common. Food prices continue to escalate. For the first time, the price of a pound of ground beef is now higher than the federal minimum wage. That's an interesting statistic. The Federal Reserve is telling us that 42.5% of recent college graduates were underemployed at the end of 2025. Underemployed just means they're not making as much as previous college graduates were making at the time they graduated. We continue to see retailers close stores. I've seen that in my town. I see stores closing. It's not looking too good. Papa John's has announced that they will be closing approximately 300 restaurants. I didn't even know Papa John's had restaurants. I guess they mean the storefronts that deliver pizzas. One of our too big to fail banks has decided that now is the time to cut 2,500 jobs. Morgan Stanley. So they cut about 3% of their workforce. This is going to continue, actually, because the financial system, the financial system is one of the most sensitive to economic stress. So anytime there's stress in the economy, it shows up in the economic system, the financial system first. Now we got kind of a different situation going on here. Now we got this conflict is causing production problems, and these production problems will likely lead to layoffs, which then will likely lead to financial stress. But a lot of times there's something that breaks in the financial system, and then that causes kind of a ripple effect. But we kind of have it going in the opposite direction this time. eBay's laying off about 800 employees, it says. At one time, Wendy's was doing great, but in 2026, it will be permanently shuttering hundreds of locations. The fast food chain, Wendy's, will shutter 5 to 6% of its stores nationwide. Meta, the parent of Facebook, apparently intends to let nearly 8,000 employees go. From coast to coast, thousands of supply chain workers have been told to hit the bricks, according to this. A wave of layoffs across the U.S. supply chains, from EV battery plants and auto parts factories and warehouses to rail terminals. something like 4,000 workers have been impacted. According to Newsweek, the following list of companies have all announced layoffs during the month of April. So you got Blue Cross Blue Shield of California, you got Zenith, Purdue Foods, Boston Metallurgical. Let's see if there's some other names that we recognize. L3, that's a pretty good sized company. Heritage Bank of Commerce, C3AI, that's a software company. Wells Fargo, Lucid, it's another software company. Wisconsin Financial, Liberty Dental Plan, never heard of that, but they're laying off people. The total unfunded obligations of U.S. government have now reached a staggering $130 trillion. So, unfunded liabilities are like, we overspend, for example, on Social Security every year. And so we write a little IOU. The Social Security Administration says, we owe the Treasury, $1 billion, and they kind of put it in the little filing cabinet. So we kind of owe that money to ourselves. In other words, we're not collecting it, but we're not covering that. Whatever you pay in Social Security taxes is not paying for the monthly outgo for Social Security recipients. So that's kind of an internal unfunded liability. Medicare has unfunded liabilities. And so our debt, our real debt, if you want to look at it that way, is 40 trillion plus 130 trillion. So really it's 170 trillion. So all that really means when you have unfunded liabilities or unfunded obligations to ourselves, it just means that those programs are going to get cut in the future. That's all that means. Social Security, Medicare won't be around because at some point the government's going to have to tax more to pay for these programs because the ability to borrow will be dropped. As interest rates go up, the ability to borrow goes down. So that's 18 reasons. That's what we have here on this article from Zero Hedge. So go read the article. It's probably good to go through it and be familiar with it, but it's not looking great. Not looking great for the economy. Really, mostly from like a job standpoint, I guess, is the best way to think about that. I see this in my own family. My daughter graduated in December, and she's not working the job she likes, but she's getting some experience and working, but it's not what she wants to do. So this is kind of just where we are. I remember when I graduated and came out of college, the job market was not as bad as it is now. There's a lot of pressures on the job market right now. I think there's still jobs, but it's like there's like a middle range of workers that it's serving, right? Your workers at the retirement end of the range are probably not doing so great, and workers at the very low end are not doing so great. But there are people moving there that in middle age, say between 30 and 45, that continue to get opportunities. And so I think that'll continue until we start getting layoffs. But it's like I tell my daughter, you just got to get out there and get some experience, work hard, start building your reputation, and keep your eyes open for opportunities and things you enjoy doing. That's really all you can do. All right, this last clip is from Tom Woods and Dave Smith. We took a couple of their clips the other day for the show, but this was the brief portion where Dave talks about affordability and specifically about housing and how being able to buy a house, raise a family, this is key to America. If you look at birth rates are way down in America. You need at least 2.1 to replace your population. We're like at 1.6 or something like that. So all these things are driving this. Affordability is a big part of that. People don't feel like that they can afford to bring children into the world. They don't feel like they can take care of a spouse and have kids. These are big problems when you're talking about what is America going to look like in 50 years. it's not looking good. Now, I would recommend that, if you're listening to this, you should have children. It's great. I don't know how it works out, but somehow you're able to afford them. You just do. It's not easy. Things pop up, things happen, and unexpected things happen, and it makes things difficult. But I just think it's just one of the greatest things you can experience as a human being is raising a family and enjoying having a family. Enjoying the holidays, enjoying time together, enjoying vacations, and just enjoying life. Life is meant to be lived. It's work is part of life, but raising a family is part of life. Going on vacation, spending time together, things like that. These are all part of living. So I highly recommend it. I would not recommend somebody go, well, it's just too unaffordable to have kids. And I'm not subscribing to that way of thinking at all. All right, let's jump into this last clip and then we'll wrap up the show after that.
I think that, there's things like, of course, Ron Paul has been literally talking about sound money and inflation every day for I don't know, 50, 60 years or something like that. There's not been a day there's not been a microphone that he hasn't said "end the Fed" into. And I think that what's really exploded over the last 5 years has been how devastating the price inflation is. This is why all the Democrats are running on unaffordability. And it's an interesting time because I think libertarians pay attention to money more than any other political camp. And it's getting more obvious than ever before that we have to keep destroying this currency in order to fight these wars for Israel. And that's why the average first-time house owner is 40 years old in America today, which just is like, if there's one statistic that is just so damning for your entire society, man, because there are so many implications of that. But your first-time home owner is 40 years old. That means you don't have a conservative society anymore. It's impossible to, because people aren't starting families. And that's the whole thing that you need people in their 20s and 30s to be starting families. In order to have a productive society, a moral society, a free society, for all of those things, that's what you need.
Healthy society.
Healthy society. Sorry, we can't do that because we got wars of choice to go fight.
All right. Yeah, it's funny because almost, and I've kind of made that case on the show here, is almost everything that you think is wrong with America is because of the money. And if you think war is bad, it's because of the money. It's because we have fiat money. If we had like gold, let's just say we had gold coins in our pockets and that's how we paid for things, the U.S. government would not be fighting these wars. The U.S. government military would be, I don't know, a fifth of the size it is now. I mean, the budget would just be minuscule compared to where it is. And Trump wants to raise it even further. It's $1 trillion. He wants to raise it to $1.5 trillion. All this is made possible with fiat money, with money that you can just create out of nothing. Okay? And it's not just money, okay? It's credit. So I'm gonna cover that very quickly. So when you go put your money in the bank, let's say you put $100 in the bank, okay? What happens is they take $5 and they put that in the vault. But then they turn around and they loan out $95. And that's called bank credit. Now once they loan that money out, it's now money. Okay? It's circulating in the economy. So that's a money creation technique, okay? And now whoever got that $95, they come and they deposit it in the bank. So they deposit $95 into the bank. The bank puts $4.50 in the vault and loans out the other, what is that, $90.50. And that becomes new money. Okay, so the banks are also creating money. Every time a loan is made, new money is created. So this is just a whole lot of money being created all the time. I don't think people really realize how large the money supply is getting because of this financial system that we've created. And of course, it benefits a couple of different groups of people. It benefits the banks and the people that own the banks, so the shareholders of the banks and the presidents of the banks and people like Jamie Dimon. It benefits all those people. It benefits the government, okay, because the government can just borrow money to fight wars or whatever it wants to do. But it also benefits people that have, like, the way you get rich in America, or the way you used to get rich, I don't know, it may not work this way going forward. If we have some huge financial crisis and the money, the dollar really suffers or something, it might not work this way. But as of right now, the way you get rich in America, and it's hard to do, because you have to capture a certain amount of wealth before you can do what I'm about to tell you to do. But the way you get rich in America is you first save a lot of money, which we just heard Saifedean Ammous say is not a good deal because the value of the money is going down all the time. But if you could manage to save a lot of money, then what you would do with that money is you would buy assets. You would buy a business. You would buy a bunch of stocks and bonds and things like that, okay? And then what you do once you have a bunch of stocks and bonds, then you go borrow against that, okay? And you buy another business. And so let's just say I keep doing that over and over and over and over again. Well, eventually I have, let's say, 50 businesses. And all these businesses throw off money every month. And because the dollar is going down, the businesses are becoming more and more valuable over time. And so this is how the rich get richer, okay? Now, you and I go to the bank and we don't borrow to buy, businesses. We borrow to buy, an F-150 or to buy a house. And this is, like Saifedean Ammous said, this is better than saving, but not if you can save enough to go buy an income earning asset. That would be better. If I go buy a business, if I go buy a $10 million business that earns, that puts $1 million in cash flow into my lifestyle, that's better than if I went and bought a $10 million house, okay, that pays me nothing. So this is how the rich get richer. This is how they get rich, is they save enough first to start this asset accumulation process, and then they borrow against those assets to buy more income earning assets. And one day you wake up and you got a huge supply of assets and you got a huge income stream to go with it. And now some of you might be thinking, well, that's the stock market. You just buy more and more in the stock market. But the stock market can go down pretty dramatically. Businesses generally don't go down in value. So it's better to buy a business than it would be to buy stocks. Years ago, there was a guy that we traded with. He was a trader. His name was Dave. We called him Hey Dave. And what Hey Dave did is he would trade. He would take like $50,000 and he would trade it up to about $250,000. And then he would take that $250,000. He'd go to the bank and put that $250,000 down and buy like a gas station. Okay, and then he would start with $50,000 again, and he would trade that up to $300,000, and then he would take $250,000 out and go buy another gas station. And he owned like 20 gas stations. Okay, and we asked him, why don't you just trade up to $1 billion? I mean, if you're obviously a successful trader. And his whole thing is it was psychologically difficult for him to look at a certain type of loss. Anytime you're trading, you're going to have losses. It's not all wins, right? In fact, it's maybe only about 30 to 40% of the time you're winning. 60% of the time you're looking at a loss. And the idea is to have small losses, but then have large gains. And then over time, your large gains, just way overwhelm your small losses. But psychologically, he couldn't look at more than like a $500 or $7,500 loss at any one trade. So he just learned over time that he could only trade up to about 300,000, and he could start with 50, trade it up to 300, and then draw it down and go buy a real asset and hire people to work there. And he also hired like a manager to manage them. And that's how he made money. But you can tell just by the story I told you that that's the same thing I just described. That was his way of accumulating capital so that he could then go buy a business. And then that business throws off a certain amount of income every month. And he just got richer and richer and richer and richer doing that. Now, you got to be a good trader to do it that way. But it's possible, if you invest the time and learn how to do it, and you can save a little seed money, you can go do things like that. And that's how the rich get richer. But it's not helping, the vast majority of us that trade time for money. We get up every day, we spend 8 to 10 hours a day working, and our employer pays us a certain amount of money for that. And, a big chunk of that gets taxed away right off the top. And then we have our outgo, and we're trying to, save, and we're trying to make all that stretch. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge for people that trade their time for money. So, my advice would be to try to figure out a way to not trade your time for money. That's the best way to overcome this this just constant destruction of the U.S. dollar and our economy. Just outrun it as best you can. But you got to be good to do that, and not a lot of people are. It's a lot harder than people think. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks for coming into the show today or this evening. I hope you enjoyed that. I think affordability is going to be a huge, huge subject this November, and I just wanted to have something out there. If you think it's worth sharing, please feel free to do so. If you are so inclined, come into the YouTube channel and like and subscribe the video. That helps the algorithm kind of show more people what I'm talking about here on who gets to decide. And of course, the more people that see it, the more people like to stay around, and then the audience gets bigger, and that helps me out. So if you could help do that, I would appreciate it. And I guess we'll talk to you next time on Who Gets to Decide. Come in a few days. We'll have another show for you here. And I got a list of things that I want to talk about. I think these are important things, and I mean, I'm sure we'll get back into the politics and the war. And right now, we're kind of still in this holding pattern around the ceasefire. Although it's not really a ceasefire, is it? Israel's bombing the hell out of Lebanon, and there's I don't know. It doesn't seem like a ceasefire to me. Somebody shot at a ship the other day, and so I don't know. It's a strange definition of ceasefire, but technically speaking, the ceasefire is still going on. I'm hoping the Trump administration will figure out a way to extricate themselves from this deal so we can start repairing the damage. We haven't felt a lot of the damage here in the U.S. yet, but Southeast Asia is not doing so well. Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, these places are starting to have some real problems. And eventually those problems will bleed into the United States, because so much of what is produced in the world comes from that part of the world. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys later. Peace.